Welcome to the Future Generations Podcast, providing you with the world-changing content necessary to inspire you, your family, and our planet to a life of optimal health potential. We'll help you make the choices that powerfully influence the lives you bring into this world. It's time to strengthen our resolve to do better now and for our future generations with your host, Dr. Stanton Hom.
Okay, welcome to another episode of the Future Generations Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Stanton Hom. I'm smiling at Jess because you have the best poses all the time. Not everybody's going to be able to see this, like from your videos to like your collab videos. It's like you always got some of the best poses, and I always think about this sometimes because I always think about this in the office when I hear a conversation. I'm like, oh, things guys don't say. Interesting. Like I would never stand like you, but you look fantastic, and
Thank
it's
you
awesome.
so much.
And it's so amazing to have you back again. We don't have that many two-time interviewees, and you are one of our special people. And I just can't wait to talk about whatever you want to talk about because there's oh man, there's so many reasons why I consider you one of the more important people in the world, and it's one of which is because of the whole story you told last time about leaving the system and about, what you started to see as far as like those contradictions in the system and then calling those systems out and then them, literally like attacking you for calling out those types of things, which is one aspect. But the other aspect that we didn't get into all of like that deeply is like the miracles you see, like the miracles at the hand of the work that you do on a day-to-day basis, and now virtually, like actually virtually most of the time, giving up your license in many respects, like all sorts of like starting a compound. Anyways, we can get into
so many things.
Dr. Jess MD, I would love for you to introduce yourself again, but then at the same time, let's just get going. This is gonna be fun.
Yeah, I consider, for those listening, Dr. Stan is one of my friends and colleagues, and I've spoken at his event, Heart of Freedom. We've actually met in person and are friends, and so I'm honored to be back here. Come on, the second time, honored. And I've got all kinds of new stuff to talk about, so.
Awesome.
Good.
I know we were talking a little bit about that before ahead of time, but I think with the story with methylene blue, what got me was that something that you could take essentially orally, right, could change the tone of the zygomatic muscles in your face that are actually signs and symptoms of carbon monoxide poisoning, which I'm staring at my carbon monoxide sensor right there, and it is fatal, and COVID or whatever the thing is causes endogenous carbon monoxide production in the body.
Correct.
But that's probably not the only thing that does that, and you have a potential solution for it, and I love it.
Yeah, absolutely. Got right into it, knocked it out of the ballpark. I love it. So I am not claiming to be an expert on methylene blue by any means, but I am claiming to tell a story of how it helped me here. And I hope to help other people with this story. So I was actually on a Zoom call probably a month ago with a chemical and environmental toxicity specialist as well as some other doctors. And I was presenting on long haulers actually, and talking about how our body can't carry oxygen. The hemoglobin can't carry oxygen in long haulers. And sometimes when you put people on the ventilator, it causes a reperfusion injury and people don't do so well. And this chemical toxicity specialist interrupted me, and he said, hey, I'm sorry to interrupt your presentation. I hope you don't take offense to this. And I'm thinking, gosh, where's this going? Mm-hmm. And he says, the same thing happens in carbon monoxide toxicity. It's a different pathogenesis, but basically the heme oxidase breaks down hemoglobin. Hemoglobin can't carry oxygen anymore, so it's a similar type of presentation. And that's how carbon monoxide acts in the body. And what happens with that is it can paralyze muscles. It can actually have a lot of different symptoms of carbon monoxide toxicity. They're often missed. And there's something called occult carbon monoxide toxicity, where the carbon monoxide can stay stuck in the tissues. And that's because carbon monoxide binds to hemoglobin almost 300 times tighter than oxygen does. So what's going to knock it off?
Mm-hmm.
What's going to remove it, right? Um, so it had stayed. He looked at me and he said, "You have the face of someone who has carbon monoxide toxicity."
Interesting.
And I said, "No, I'm not offended at all. Please do tell me more." And he said, Edgar Allan Poe named this face. If you've ever seen those posters or paintings of Edgar Allan Poe, he had that one big eye and the small eye.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the asymmetry that carbon monoxide can cause in the face.
Hmm.
And that's caused from paralysis of the zygomatic muscle here. And he said your right eye is curling down towards the mouth, and it looks lower than the other eye.
Mm-hmm.
And that is the telltale face that Edgar Allan Poe named.
Interesting.
He says that he's an expert in this, a lot of chronic fatigue, a lot of multiple chemical sensitivity, histamine intolerance, brain fog. It's actually a carbon monoxide toxicity.
Interesting.
So, yeah, go ahead.
No, go ahead. Go ahead, please.
He goes on to say, you should look back in your pictures and see the last time your face was symmetrical, because this happened to you over your lifetime. He said COVID and long haulers has taught us that it is possible that something like that can cause endogenous or inside the body production of carbon monoxide.
Mm.
And it's not just sitting in a car. Like I didn't try and sit in a car in a garage with it running with carbon monoxide to happen. I didn't know how this had happened to me. And I was pretty baffled by that because I have noticed a change in my face.
Yeah.
He goes on to say a lot of mood conditions happen with this. And occult carbon monoxide toxicity is very common, and a lot of the carbon monoxide readers are not accurate enough.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So I was pretty amazed by this guy, pretty blown away by him. And he goes on to tell me that red light is the treatment he would prefer because red light drives carbon monoxide out of tissues, turns on mitochondria, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, me, I'm here giving this long haulers presentation on a similar thing where you don't get oxygen. And I'm like, well, I know some remedies too. So I go look into methylene blue. And I found a world of something I had never heard of before, never used before. And it seemed to be a treatment for long haulers and my asymmetric telltale face, if you will. Yeah, and he goes on to say, this doesn't happen to me, but it happens to a lot of my patients, and I'm sure yours too, Dr. Stan. He says, because I asked, why in the world are we making carbon monoxide in the body if it's this poisonous gas that robs us of oxygen? Carbon monoxide helps kill pathogens.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Yeah.
That's what it does. And so actually people who have high carbon monoxide levels don't have that severe COVID, but they may have severe long haulers, right?
Interesting.
He goes on to say that women naturally make carbon monoxide cyclically in their body with their cycles. And the week before the cycle hits, PMS week, ladies, your carbon monoxide endogenously is higher than other weeks or times in your cycle. And he goes on to say, I am not a proponent of tampons because this is the gas and bloating that a lot of women feel the day before their period. And when you put a tampon in there, the gas cannot be relieved. So carbon monoxide levels go higher. Women feel sick with PMS symptoms. Same thing for morning sickness in pregnancy because they don't have cycles to relieve the gas.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So this is morning sickness in pregnancy is what he's saying.
Wow. Wow.
So I know I just said so much, but
No. So I've always seen asymmetries of the cranial vault and asymmetries of the face through the lens of neurology, right? Because the facial muscles respond to and most directly the brainstem, but maybe more of a bigger picture, the brain, right? And there's data that shows that you could actually map blind spots, right? Like I know how to map a blind spot with somebody standing like next to a wall. You can actually have them cover their eye and kind of move things around. You can literally draw their blind spot. And Dr. Carrick is arguably the most important human being in chiropractic neurology, and he has a study on how like adjusting the cervical spine can change the shape and the size of the blind spot, right? And the reason why it's important is your blind spot is about cortical function. It's about your brain's health overall.
Huh.
And so I've always viewed things like, because sometimes we would compete, right? Because you're talking about something that you would take from the outside, put it into your body, but you're also talking about how physiologically there is an endogenous production of a toxic substance inside of our body that potentially with one side of our species that has these cycles that happen literally from puberty on, that is potentially intelligent and part of our connection to nature, right? And artificially stopping it, soaking it up, changing the pressure, changing, virtually all of that can change that endogenous level of that toxin that one leads to all the symptoms that we have so commonly that might motivate a woman to go see a doctor, right? And so maybe it's taking away that artificial stimulus and finding a way to have the neurological balance, but then maybe the structural balance. Because I was looking up a book, because I don't know if you've heard of the book Crooked. Have you heard of it?
No.
Man-Made Disease Explained. It's written by a man named Forrest Moretti. Have you heard of that guy before? He's a vaccine dude. He's a childhood vaccine dude. Like super prolific writer. Very unique videos, and then also just the way that he kind of approaches things. He wrote a book about polio called The Moth and the Iron Lung. This one is about when the lymph gets that toxic, it asymmetrically affects the flow and the flood and the drainage of the face. And so I think we're all kind of speaking about the same thing. You just have a window in that is potentially right at our fingertips, which is awesome. I think it's beautiful.
I hope so. And I love aggressive lymph work too. Like everyone on the planet needs that. I mean, my goodness. Dr. Stephen Lynn, who's a dentist, wrote a book about.
Love that guy. Yeah.
He's great. I know. He wrote a book about how, and he showed pictures of our ancestors with these big, beautiful smiles and mandibles and straight teeth. And you're like, gosh, we shrink people's mandibles down now, and toxins can actually make our face crooked. And right? And why in neurology are they looking at nerves and asymmetry in faces? What causes nerves not to work right? Toxins, pathogens, right?
Yeah. So tell me more.
So I do want to tell you a little bit about methylene blue, because I did bring it up. And I should just say before we get into methylene blue too, that there are a lot of exogenous carbon monoxide sources too. I mentioned one, which is sitting in a running vehicle. There are things like gas generators, gas power tools, smoking anything, even coffee and vaccines can raise endogenous carbon monoxide levels.
Wow.
Okay, so before we get into methylene blue. So methylene blue, before probably 2 months ago, you guys, had no idea what this was. And I've heard people mention it off the cuff and just didn't know what it was. And just so people know it, there is an IV form, there is an oral form. In the United States, it's a little more difficult to get, and that's because there isn't routine testing done on it. And it can come with heavy metals. So you need to find someone who gives you a certificate of analysis, and then you do your homework on the company, right? Before I say anything else. Now, methylene blue is probably one of the only man-made dyes you'll ever hear me promote. It stands for methylthionine chloride, and it's actually a man-made compound that was made in like the mid 1800s, and it's used now as more of a nootropic to increase like memory, mood, longevity. It's anti-aging. There's even a skincare line out there with methylene blue in it. So it was synthesized actually as a textile dye in the late 1800s. And now today it's used to stain organs internally so surgeons will know where to operate. And so it's going to stain everything already when I tell you that. And it was originally used and created to not just as a dye, but used to treat malaria. So that tells us that it gets inside the cells, which is important for cellular health if it's actually going to be efficacious. And I say this because, mitochondria are inside the cells. And so if you think about malaria, it's an intracellular parasite. It actually gets inside the red blood cells. Very hard to see. It's microscopic. And so if methylene blue works against that, it's getting inside the very nitty-gritty of our cells, right?
Yeah.
And so it actually has been used to treat mood disorders like schizophrenia in the past, mild cognitive impairment, neurodegenerative conditions, anything that has a mitochondrial component, which is most chronic diseases today, right? So go ahead.
Why don't you tell us a little, just for some of the, I think you might be the first interviewee expert that has even mentioned mitochondria so far. Yeah,
Oh,
I know. So maybe we need to go a little bit more basic, if you don't mind, or more fundamental. Yeah.
absolutely. Sorry, guys. So, okay. So, we don't just have this endless energy all the time, even though it seems like some people might. We have these little energy makers in our cells, and you guys may remember them from Biology 101. They're those oblong little, they call them apparatuses, and they make ATP or adenosine
Mm-hmm.
triphosphate, which is energy. And, even when you're sweating, when you're working out, when any of your organs are performing any biochemical functions at all within the body, they are using energy from the mitochondria. In fact, every single one of your cells has mitochondria in it, except for red blood cells.
Interesting.
And yeah, every single one of them. So people will talk about wanting your liver to work better or your bowels to work better. But sometimes we need to even go more microscopic to the cellular level at what makes the energy, because how can we expect the organs to run properly if the cells that make them up aren't tuned in properly? And so mitochondria are really important. I hope that kind of puts the emphasis on it for people to let them know how important they are. And really, they're a catch-all for a lot of chronic diseases. Diabetes, Alzheimer's, a lot of autoimmunity, a lot of infertility is often blamed on mitochondrial dysfunction as we age.
Hmm.
And one last point, mitochondria don't, they have DNA and they're only inherited from our maternal lineage. So it's pretty cool. And
Interesting.
yeah, it's really cool. You can actually trace back all the way back to Eve by looking at
Mm-hmm.
mitochondrial lineage. And so what's important about them having DNA and acting kind of like bacteria is that they don't have the same repair mechanisms that our normal DNA does. So if they get injured by pathogens, toxins, stress, trauma, whatever it is, they may not be able to repair as well.
Gotcha. It's kind of interesting because most of us don't even know, most of the general public won't know about the subcellular components, right? That there are um, not just organ systems, right? Because organ systems are important. And a lot of people, we have talked about eating organs and glandulars and things like that, right? This is making me very interested in, like, okay, that would be why the quality of where you source these types of organ meats is really important, in a sense that if they're pasture raised, they're more than likely going to have healthier mitochondria and other subcellular function, versus if
Mhm.
you're eating a ton of GMO, grain fed organ meats, which you shouldn't do, and they probably don't sell anyways. But the point is that if we are ourselves pasture raised or as healthy as possible, then we need to have an understanding of virtually the inner workings of the body, and something so um, foundational as metabolism, like energy production and usage in the body, which would fuel virtually every physiological function that exists, that keeps us alive. Why not, right? Why not understand this? And so methylene blue helps improve mitochondrial function. How?
Right. So it actually is able to get inside the cell and it works on, gosh, I'm going to give people nightmares, Dr.
It's
Stan. It
okay.
works on the Krebs cycle. Do you
Yeah,
guys
that's
remember
okay.
that? The Krebs cycle and the electron transport
Mm-hmm.
chain.
Mm-hmm.
And those things work by we're creating a gradient. Now, what does that mean? That means they're passing electrons and causing things to want to react because there's a positive or a negative. So you want to
Mm-hmm.
grab onto it,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
right? And they're what we call transferring electrons, which helps produce that gradient, almost like a water mill generating electricity or power that way. And we create ATP that we are able to use for all our reactions. So methylene blue helps transfer those electrons and donates electrons so
Mm-hmm.
that our body is able to work better. It readily crosses the blood-brain barrier as well, and so it's extremely neuroprotective.
Yep, that's awesome. So methylene blue, you mentioned the word nootropic, and nootropic for a lot of people who are interested, because we have talked a little bit about mushrooms, we have talked about regenerative farming and mycelium, and that
Love it.
network of that mycelium layer being virtually essentially the same type of tissue. methylene blue works to restore that type of network within the human body. This is radical. This is awesome.
I'm telling you, it blew my mind.
Yeah.
I
And I'm
couldn't.
interested. So you actually noticed a change in your symmetry. So tell me more about that.
I should pull up. I wish I had my phone here. I would show you the picture. I have a picture of when before methylene blue and red light and after. And methylene blue has been the treatment for carbon monoxide poisoning for decades,
Yeah.
right? And red light is synergistic with it. It helps drive into the tissues, actually.
Wow.
And so, yeah, absolutely. And so, yeah, I've definitely noticed a difference in my face. It was the right side of my face. My eyebrow actually went down a little bit more right here at the corner.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I looked kind of like crazy-eyed a lot sometimes.
Yeah.
And I
I've been
can
meaning to tell
definitely,
you that, Jess. I've been meaning to tell
I
you that for
definitely,
years. No, I'm just kidding.
well,
I'm
you know,
kidding.
the internet has no chill, and people have written that on my post before. So I've definitely heard it.
Really?
Oh, you know, the internet has no chill. You could have to learn to
Mm.
not take anything personally if you're going to be on your own Instagram.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Seriously. So yeah, like I've definitely noticed it over the years. I didn't know what it was, and so I have a before and after picture where you can tell the drooping on the right side of my face has improved. And there are certain days where I can tell I need a dose or that I need red light or something because it binds so tightly in hemoglobin. It's a process to really get it out. But this stuff, I can tell a difference in how heavy I'm sleeping, and it's gotten rid of people's pain. It's also an alternative, somewhat, I guess, slightly controversial treatment for Bartonella.
Interesting.
Um, yeah, it helps with neurotransmitter balancing out and release. It helps with, it is an antioxidant, so it helps with scavenging free radicals that age and break our DNA. There's so many different benefits that I've seen from this. The only downfall that I've seen is that you really need to be vigilant about your testing to test for heavy metals. You really need to be sure you're keeping it, mostly less than I do, about probably 30 to 50 milligrams a day, but you really want to do less than 100 milligrams because at higher doses, it can actually be a pro-oxidant.
Interesting.
Yes. So
Yeah.
you want to keep it at lower doses. Yeah, that's pretty cool.
So is there a significance between the methylene blue versus the red light, kind of contradictorily on the visible light scale and
It's
things like that?
interesting, isn't it? We think it
Yeah.
drives that the red light drives in the methylene blue into the tissues more, and we are starting to see more about how light affects health, our circadian
Yep.
rhythm, our biologic
Yep.
clocks. And if you guys haven't heard, they're actually doing light IVs, light watches called Weber watches, where you're getting different frequencies put into your skin, put
Mm-hmm.
into an actual vein if it's an IV. And methylene blue actually comes in an IV too, where they'll do UV irradiated IVs as well as methylene blue with it.
And you said just of note, you said that this in other forms is used to clean fish tanks.
Yes, it
Okay.
is. The blue stuff
Yeah,
they
yeah,
clean.
yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's it.
Interesting. Interesting. So here's what we're not going to do, everybody. Right? Do you guys remember when hydroxychloroquine came out and they said, "Oh, it works for COVID, blah 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 blah," and they started censoring it, and then they started putting the media articles of the dudes that were freaking buying hydroxychloroquine in the form of fish tank cleaner? Like, you're not going to buy that version of this,
Please
right?
don't, guys.
Yeah.
Darwinism. Darwinism. Please do not.
But it is also as safe as, say, hydroxychloroquine. But is it a drug, technically?
It's not. It is man-made.
Yeah.
It
Okay.
is. It was made in
Yeah.
the 1800s.
Yeah.
It is. And so, yeah, technically, I was reading up on it. It's been around so long
Yeah.
that it can't be patented. It's
Mm-hmm.
been it's been
Mm-hmm.
like there's some year mark where they can't do that anymore. But
Wow.
what people are doing now are adding like you could add like 0.1% calcium and then trademark that and
Gotcha.
sell it. So it's been around so long it's kind of grandfathered in and isn't really considered a drug or anything at this point.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
It's pretty awesome. I mean, thinking about a lot of the things that you're mentioning and a lot of things that are potentially at the root of a lot of chronicity that we're noticing in the world, and recognizing that potentially at our fingertips there's something that that could be accessible, that could be physiologically impactful in a healthy way, and then at the same time potentially something that maybe I don't know how to say this, because that's the other thing. Hydroxychloroquine is also a treatment for malaria, right? And I think it's the same. It's a similar philosophy. Intracellular pathogens that actually kind of get into the cellular networks of things that oftentimes, and this might be for me, just to be completely frank, something I wouldn't recommend or not recommend because it might be outside of the scope of which I practice, not my licensure and the way that my scope is from a doctor of chiropractic perspective. But this is a little bit off the beaten path, and why I love speaking to experts like you, Jess, because how the heck am I never would have even thought about this. And this is actually a little bit more personal, and this is actually a little bit when I said to you before we started recording that what happened with the those who shall be unnamed in January with all sorts of crazy drama within the health freedom movement is minuscule in comparison to what I'm going through in my life. I recently found out, and this is crazy, Jess, that my son, who's 5 months old, is technically blind.
What?
Yeah. Crazy. -11, not actually blind, -11, so he can see, but he's a -11 diopter. Like, he has the worst vision that virtually everybody I've taken him to so far can see, right? And this is really important because on your end, I don't have all the answers. And I'm going to say this with 1,000% certainty in the sense that for me, my kid is absolutely vibrant and crazy and healthy. I just started to recognize because my mother-in-law triggered the F out of me and saying, why isn't he making eye contact? And then all of a sudden people are talking about my kids having potentially delays and things like that, right? And I was like, dude, no way my kid is delayed because I'm a freaking chiropractor and that's just what we do, right?
Yeah.
And then I started to sit back and I was like, oh shoot, I don't know if my son can see right now, right? I've taken him to a developmental optometrist, a pediatric ophthalmologist, and then we were getting these crazy prognoses. Like they were completely ignoring the fact that he had vision issues, and that was our big priority because I don't know if you know this about infant development, but if babies don't see a clear picture, they have a potential never to see a clear picture. It's called refractive amblyopia. Why is this important? Is I was at the end of my rope in terms of what I knew I could do for my son and where I could take him, right? And so our prayer over the last couple weeks, it's literally up until the last couple weeks, was how do I find the optometric or ophthalmologic, whatever, right? Version,
Yes.
ophthalmologic, whatever, version of me, right? Version of my practice where we see the potential in kids, we see brilliance that they start to self-heal and regulate. And you know what the hell? Like we found the guy.
You did?
In like a week. I think we found the guy where he takes my kid and he, does a good history, nothing super in depth because we've already done 3 really solid ones. And then he does his exam, which was far better and far superior and far more pleasant for my child than any of the others. Didn't have to dilate his eyes at all. And then he just said, let's go to the back room, right? He goes to the back room. He turns on, like, this is how old school this guy is. He's like 70 years old. His front bulletin board, it's still like cork with push pins. It says, happy birthday, doctor. I won't name his name right now. 2002, right? When they wrote the prescription for my son's vision and his glasses, they wrote it on a typewriter.
Oh my gosh, I love it.
When they charged us for his first exam, they used one of those credit card processors that actually use carbon copy, right?
Yeah.
That's how old school he is, right?
Love it.
He's forgotten more things that I could ever learn, right, at this point in his career. And I walk into this room. He turns on an old projector. It plays a black and white image on this big wall. And it plays classical music. And my son, he goes, let me hold your son. And he walks our son closer and closer and closer to this picture. And then all of a sudden, my son's eyes go like, boom.
Oh.
And he's like, so... your son can not only see, but look at his posture. And it was the first time my son had because that's what we do. We don't know the outside world. We don't have a connection with the outside world. We're not chasing things with our head. Our posture and our proprioceptive reflexes, those types of things don't turn on. He takes my wife to the front desk and just says, Your son's not delayed. Your son's not disabled, which is what the ophthalmologist, aka Terrace, was trying to say. He just needs to see. Let's help him see, right? Why am I saying this is I don't claim to know everything, and I could stand in my own dogma and say, I have a book that says vaccine injury causes crooked faces. I have a book, or I have my own training, and I'm a board eligible functional neurologist, and say, I know the cause of asymmetrical faces. Don't tell me about this particular thing that could be, don't give me something that, like there's all sorts of things that I could do. And what do we do oftentimes is we shut off the potential miracle or the potential avenue for self-healing or radical transformation of our bodies and our minds and our spirits that honestly that's old. It's antiquated. The way forward is me humbling myself for this doctor and this developmental optometrist, and me humbling myself with experts like you, because we all don't have the answer. We all have parts of the answer, and it's about collaboration, about synergistic, natures of moving forward. And this is awesome, Jess. I love what you're sharing because
Absolutely.
it's something that I didn't like. That's why I just said, hey, what do you want to talk about? Because I honestly don't know, because I don't know a lot about long haulers. I also don't know a lot about parasites. I also don't know a lot about the things that you are an expert in. That I know a lot about mitochondria, but not to the degree on how to influence them like you do. And why is that important is because those all are windows into that miraculous healing that could be at your fingertips and you don't know it is. Right?
That's exactly right. I mean, I didn't know about this 2 months ago, right? I
Mm-hmm.
didn't know. And I will tell you, I had goosebumps all over my body when you were telling me about your son.
Yeah.
Because um, if you've ever met me, you've probably heard me claim about how I, complain, not claim, complain about how I can't see anything close up and I'm blind almost. And this is a new thing that happened a few years back. I'm 43 now, so probably 4 years ago, I started. In the last couple of years, I've had to break down and get readers because I couldn't see anything.
Yeah.
I have not read readers since starting. I've not worn readers since starting methylene blue.
Get the
My floaters are gone.
out of here.
My readers, I haven't had them. I don't know where they are. I couldn't tell you where they are. I have not used them. This thing crosses the blood-brain barrier. It's a neuroprotectant. It's an antioxidant. It scavenges free radicals. We have mitochondria, a ton of mitochondria in our rods and cones and in our eyes. We have a ton of mitochondria in our brain. And in the studies, if you look at methylene blue for children, they use it. It has published studies on how it fixes refractory septic shock.
What the fuck? Sorry.
Yeah. No, it's
Excuse me.
okay.
Excuse
It's
me.
okay.
Right? Like,
Yeah.
like my question yesterday was like, do I have the energy to interview Jess today? Like, no, really, do I really have the time? And no, I don't. But every single interview I just randomly invited Carrie Madej, and she's been in a plane crash, and like amazing interview that I needed to hear. I don't know. You didn't know Carrie was in a plane crash?
No, I didn't know
She was in a
this.
plane crash.
No.
She is in a radical healing right now. She not only knows, wait till that interview comes out next week.
Okay. I'll listen.
She knew she wasn't going to die. She knew, like, her level of conviction and faith in the forward projection of her life, knew she wasn't going to die. And then she has commanded, since she survived, her own healing. And it's pulled in the different resources of people that she, honestly, very similar to you, just random dude I met at this one place. And, he's got this, it makes really good sense. And all of a sudden, it's the thing that's helping her radically heal. Because
Yes.
somebody, even an expert like her, is humble enough to be like, let's give that a shot.
And goosebumps all over me.
I know. So sorry. The reason why, sorry for the expletive, guys. I don't do that often on my podcast. But
It's important.
it's like, am I literally talking to somebody that has a potential solution for my own son that I had no concept of?
I'm telling you, look it up. I can't tell you. I've seen studies about it correcting vision, but the science is there for it, and I can tell you that it absolutely 1,000%, without a shadow of a doubt, corrected my vision. Yeah.
You can't make this stuff up, right?
No.
I was just on an interview with a guy named Dan Doty. He's been on Rogan 3 times. He's creating a podcast because he works with men, but he works specifically now with fathers. And he started a podcast called Fatherhood Unlocked. And he interviewed me, and this is one of the things that I talked about. He's like, so sometimes I talk to dads and I just want them to realize that everything is okay. And it's okay to be okay, right? And he's like, tell me what your lens of that is. I'm like, well, for me, the lens is 1 in 100 million sperm, and that egg that goes through the ovulation process that month, that is fertilized, and like the odds of even existing today are so minuscule. And then you think about the 50,000 neural connections and the, that happen and plasticize per second in utero, plus the, 2 half cells that transform into 26 billion cells by this time that we're born in 280 days, and no one has to consciously control that. Like, you're a freaking miracle, man. Like, are you kidding me? And the fact that you and I, who literally were in the same damn city and never met each other, lobbying for the same stuff, advocating for the same things, and it takes this global fake pandemic BS with a fake virus, whatever you want to call it, to actually lead us to the same organization with some of the same people. And then how long have I known you now? A couple years, almost 3 probably.
Yeah.
And we've never had this conversation, and then you're blowing my mind to the point where this may lead me down a path where it's like another solution that could radically help my son Hill.
I had to tell you, I have to tell everyone who will listen about it. And not everyone will listen, but I can't tell you. I don't feel things, Stan, when I take them. I'm a warrior genotype. I don't feel bad. My body protects me from feeling bad. I came back with my gut zoomer and had leaky gut, 0 symptoms. 0.
Wow.
Didn't even know I had it.
Wow.
So, yeah. So, like, I take this stuff and I can feel it.
Yeah.
And I don't feel things. And I can tell a difference, and I can see a difference in my clients and my patients.
So is this something that you then offer? Because I know you're not in private practice, like you don't see individual patients anymore. But is this something that people can get on their own? Is this something that people would potentially need some sort of expert like you guiding them through the process? I imagine that some people might have a problem with regulation, in terms of like they might like consume it, but maybe bathe in it, maybe drop it in their eyes,
I hope not, guys. Again, Darwinism.
I'm just saying.
Yeah, I will say
what is...
There is a methylene blue skincare company called Methylene. It's an MD that started it, so they already know about the antioxidant capabilities of methylene blue. You can get it orally, guys. It is very affordable. Now, you heard me preach about finding a certificate of analysis, about trusting the company, about asking the right questions. So I get it from CZTL. It's about $70 for 4 ampules in a powdered form that come about this big. 1 ampule is 70 days supply. You mix it with 100 mLs of filtered water. There are different percentages you can get based on strength. And, I really try and keep it below 100 milligrams just for antioxidant potential, not pro-oxidant potential.
Gotcha.
But really, and there are IVs here. This is a hard thing to find. It's usually in big cities like Seattle, LA, maybe San Diego. But there are people doing IVs in methylene blue as well.
Gotcha. What is the problem if somebody gets into that pro-oxidant effect?
I don't know if it's so much as a problem, except it could make some symptoms worse, right? Gotcha. If you're causing some DNA damage, which pro-oxidants are needed in the body. They're not a bad thing. Ozone is a pro-oxidant. Hydrogen peroxide is a pro-oxidant. Nitric oxide can act as a pro-oxidant as well. And we need all those things in the right ratios, right? Oh, not all bad, but it could cause more damage to DNA.
But it definitely has. I mean, let's just call a spade. Like, Zoom causes a pro-oxidant effect, right? EMFs cause a pro-oxidant effect. Like we know that we are exposed by that. So then it will just be essentially. It's like a general, it's not like a specific, it's not like heavy metal toxicity. It's not like Lyme intrusion. It's not like like mold, right? It's just, it's not that specific on its physiological adverse effect, whatever, but it's just like, okay, it might go into that pro-inflammatory side. It might go into that pro-oxidant effect. It may shift your DNA from regeneration to degeneration if you're at that tip scale in some respects. So don't overdo it. Is it better to start way less than more?
Yes, it is. I would start slow, especially for someone like who's the opposite of me, who's sensitive and feels everything, right?
Yeah,
I have people who tell me they feel homeopathic medication.
totally.
If that's you, let's start with job.
Totally. Got it.
Yeah, I just read
It's great.
something I have to read to you, Dr. Stan, right now. I did not know this, and I literally just looked it up and saw this. Methylene blue is the parent molecule for hydroxychloroquine.
Isn't that crazy? See?
What?
That's freaking wild, right? I did not know, but then here we are having parallel conversations and thoughts, and then here we are. That's wild. So, what would you say, Jess? Like, I actually, I'm short on time, and I would just love to know how you would then close this episode. This is wild, and I love it so much.
Yeah, I'll start with a tangent and I'll bring it back full circle. So I'm listening to a book on Audible called The Invisible Rainbow. If you haven't read it or heard it, you have, okay. Then you should read it. It talks about how in the early 1900s, people were able to fix deaf people actually with electricity and vibration. They could make them hear again if they were born deaf. Anytime, I was amazed listening to this book. And you would never believe that, right? It seems like there's answers we didn't know about, right? And so now
Totally.
this thing may seem too good to be true. And maybe I'm a little too early on the beat. Maybe it is too early to be too good to be true. But from right now, from the science I've seen, from what I have personally experienced, and my friends and family have experienced, it looks like a catch-all. And what I want to leave people with is hope. Because ultimately, when we don't have the science for things, it looks like magic. Really, magic is just science that hasn't been unearthed yet. And there are so many ways to heal and reverse disease in the body. We are just barely scratching the surface here. We talked about methylene blue. I talked about, electricity, being able to fix deaf people. Think about all the things that when we figure out really how the body works, how energy works, and that's really going to revolutionize everyone who thought they had a label for life.
That's so beautiful, and it's because most of us don't know that it's not about what's known. It really isn't about what's known. It's about the humility to recognize that what we don't know, that is actually far more miraculous than we've ever been, one, able to discover, but two, able to just be allowed to contemplate at this point, is right around that corner too. Jess, I love this, and I love you, and I appreciate everything that you've gotten to share. And who knew that this serendipitous, conversation would happen? And this is like, thank you for sending those studies as well, because I definitely want to read them and see how they affect,
You can
how
research.
our outcome's going to be.
I would love to have been one little link to helping your son feel better. So, yeah.
Appreciate you.
Thanks so much, Dr. Stan. Thanks for having me.
We appreciate you joining us for this episode of the Future Generations podcast. Remember to rate, review, and subscribe on iTunes and Spotify. For more resources based on today's episode, as well as more ways to inspire a brighter future for you and your family, visit us at thefuturegen.com. That's all available exclusively on thefuturegen.com.